Hey, Pastor Mike Burgos here with the fourth installment of our series on giving an answer to Oneness Pentecostals. And I pray that this series is helpful for you. I know that it's blessed me just being able to make these videos. And so I hope that you're, developing your apologetic. And I hope that when you encounter your Oneness friends, that you give your answer with gentleness and respect in obedience to Peter's command in 1 Peter 3:15. In the last episode, part 4, we looked at the Old Testament, thought about Isaiah 9:6, one of the most oft-used Oneness Pentecostal proof texts. And then additionally, we looked at the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord. We demonstrated a rich proto-Trinitarian Christology, demonstrating the pre-existence of the Son of God in the Old Testament, leading right up to the New Testament. We talked about how there was an expression of Judaism that was not Unitarian, what I call proto-Trinitarian, and that the Unitarian Judaism of today and of the Rabbinic period in many ways is a reaction to Christianity in Jesus, not the true biblical faith, as we might expect. Obviously, Jews who reject Jesus don't have any semblance of the biblical faith because the Old Testament is about Jesus Christ. It's interesting to me that so many non-Trinitarians say, well, Jews don't believe in the Trinity. So, Jews don't believe in Jesus either. Jews don't believe in a variety of biblical teachings, but that doesn't mean that we should jettison our belief in the Trinity because Jews don't believe in it. It's a illogical appeal to authority, but the authority really doesn't have any authority. So in this episode, I want to follow that thread right into the New Testament. I made mention of the fact that in the Second Temple period, the period between Malachi and about 70 AD, roughly the ministry of Malachi and John the Baptist, that time in between, what is sometimes called the intertestamental period, you have the Aramaic Targums coming into play. I mentioned that these are translations because Hebrew had all but fallen out of use, except by scribes and religious scholars. And so the Bible teachers of the day translate the Bible into Aramaic for the common man. And these translations, as I mentioned, are interpretive translations. And you have a reflection of this proto-Trinitarian theology, this non-Unitarian Jewish theology in the Targums. And this theology reflects a belief in a pre-existent personal word, or in the language of the Targums, the Memra. We noted that the Memra is personal. He's the translation for the angel of the Lord. And we saw a lot there in that last video. So I would encourage you to go back. I'll put a link somewhere over here or over there, and you can go back and check that video out. So in keeping with that sort of motif of the word, I'd like to think with you just for a moment about John chapter 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you, and you should be able to see what I'm seeing. This is esv.org, the website for the English Standard Version. I think it's a very helpful website. It provides a lot of helpful tools, all these study Bibles and stuff for free. In all honesty, I don't really use it very often. I have Bible software, which I make use of. But if you don't have Bible software, this is a really awesome resource. And yeah, it's just a really helpful resource. So let's think about the prologue of John. But before we do, keep in mind the Aramaic Targums and the Memra, the word, right? Oftentimes, John will utilize metaphor to describe Jesus, to characterize him, or to identify him. He is well known for his highly figurative language and his irony and his double entendre. It's been said in biblical studies that the two towers of the New Testament, the two most magnificent works among the New Testament, are the Gospel of John and the Book of Romans. The Book of Romans, obviously, it has a series of complex, oftentimes, and yet extraordinarily profound arguments dealing with the doctrine of salvation. The Gospel of John is far more simplistic. Even a child could understand it, and yet it is a deep, deep well full of wonderful profundity. The only thing is the complexity of the Gospel of John is not so much in its Greek. Its Greek is basic, rudimentary Greek. It's the kind of Greek that a first-year Greek student learns to read. Whereas Paul's Greek is significantly more developed. It's not in the broad use of vocabulary. The Gospel of John is basically one of the more limited vocabularies. Rather, it's in the figurativeness, in the beautiful way in which John expresses things, in metaphor, in simile, and this sort of thing. And we find that here in the prologue of John. The prologue, of course, if you are unaware, is the first 18 verses. And a prologue is designed to give you a synopsis of what is to come in the book. And that's what John's prologue does. It's not a preface. A preface sort of sets you up for what's to come, but a prologue gives you a snapshot of what's going on in this book and how you're to understand that. And that's what we have here. And so, looking at John's prologue, notice what he says. Verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, as I mentioned, just in that last episode, and I'll grab a book here so I can revisit some of that with you, in the Targums you have the Word. And he is all over the Bible in the Targums. For example, in Genesis 1:26, and the word of the Lord created man in his likeness, and in the likeness of the presence of the Lord he created him. Genesis 1:3, and the word of the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light according to his word. Genesis 9:13, this is the Noahic covenant. I've set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign, it shall be for a sign of the covenant between my word and between the earth. Interesting. Genesis 12:17, and the word of the Lord sent great plagues against Pharaoh. We can go into Numbers chapter 10, verse 35 and 36. Let the word of the Lord be now revealed. Return now, word of the Lord, in the goodness of your mercy, and lead your people Israel. Numbers 14. Only be not rebellious against the word of the Lord, nor be afraid of the people of the land, for they are delivered into your hand. Their strength is departed from them, and the word of the Lord is our helper. So as we go through, we could read more. Isaiah 48:13, indeed by my word I founded the earth. Genesis, it's just replete. The Targums are replete with references to the word of the Lord. He's identified as a person because, again, not only does context depict that, but he's also the translation, the Targumic translation for the angel of the Lord. So if the angel of the Lord is a person, then so is the word. Now, in light of that, we have John's gospel. In the beginning was the word. John's drawing upon that language of the Targums. And any Jew living in Palestine would have known that, especially any Pharisaical Jew who attended a synagogue, because the Targums were routinely read in the synagogue. John is also drawing upon the Hebrew Bible, because where did the Targumic translators get this idea from? They got it from the Hebrew Bible. For example, looking at Genesis 15 here, I'll just show you one example. There's probably dozens that we could look at, but just see what this says. Verse 1, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham. Okay, the word of the Lord came to Abram. Now, is that a spoken word? Is that a prophetic word to Abraham? No, because look at what it says. The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. A vision is something you see, right? A vision is not something necessarily that you only hear, because a vision connotes the utilization of your eyes. The word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, meaning that the word is a circumlocution. It's another name for God. And what John is going to tell us is it's another name for the Son of God. And by no means is this the only place that we can look in the Hebrew Bible and see this kind of language. Of course, this kind of language is never, ever addressed by Oneness Pentecostals. And I think, as I mentioned in the last video, maybe I didn't mention this, Oneness Pentecostals all but ignore the Old Testament. They use it for a few isolated proof texts, proof texts that teach monotheism, and this is supposed to, on their view, preclude Trinitarianism, which it does not, because Trinitarianism is monotheistic, meaning we believe in one God. If you're struggling with some of the language I'm using here, keep in mind, I think in episode 2 did you spent some time on definitions. And so that might be helpful for you if you're just picking it up in this part. So in light of that, going back here to John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John is pulling together all of these loose ends. The Word, the Debar in the Hebrew Bible, the Targumic Memra, the Targumic Word, and he's tying them all together. Now, additionally, thinking outside of Judaism, in the Gentile world, there's been much intellectual development. There's numerous philosophies and worldviews, and among Greek-speaking peoples, there is, commonly prevailing this idea of the Logos, or the Word. So if you look here, I have the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. So in the Tyndale, maybe if I turn on interlinear, this will help you. Hopefully you can see this. I'm going to stop sharing it and come right back here, and just to make sure that you can see this. So the Tyndale House Greek New Testament is a very good edition of the Greek New Testament. It's one of the newer critical editions. There's also the Nestle-Aland text and the UBS, United Bible Society's text. The ESV provides us with the Tyndale edition, and it has interlinears and reverse interlinears and all sorts of things that you can use if you're not all that familiar with the Greek of the New Testament. Well, as we look here, we see this term used, halagos, the Word. Now, among Gentiles, the prevailing belief in much of the Greek-speaking world was that there was, and this is building upon Aristotelian and to a certain extent Platonic thought, that there was this one singular unifying principle. They called it the Logos, the Word. This unifying principle sustained all things and, in fact, created all things. There's debate, pertaining to whether or not this is a person or a thing among, Gentile philosophers, but that was sort of a prevailing, accepted given. Not everybody held that view, but it was very common and very popular. So when John begins his, going back to the English here, begins his gospel saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, you can get a sense that John is pulling together all of these thoughts about the Word, and he's tying them up in the Son of God. He's saying, in essence, the Son of God is the one you've been talking about in the Old Testament. For example, the Son of Man passage in Daniel chapter 7, there's the Ancient of Days on his throne. The Son of Man appears and all dominion is given to him. And Jews were speculating about this big time in that Second Temple period. There's all kinds of literature speculating about who is this Son of Man? Well, the Targums identify him as the Word. John is taking all of that. He's tying it together. He's saying it all points to one person, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, using this metaphoric language, word, for Jesus. Now, why does he use it as metaphor? Well, I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I should point out here that Oneness Pentecostals routinely take a Greek understanding, a Gentile understanding of the word logos, and they'll define it as speech or logic or a plan in God's mind. And then they'll import that on John's gospel, not recognizing that this is metaphorical language. Of course, do they interpret that consistently? For example, when in Revelation 19, Jesus, the Son of God, is called the Word, and he's personal and he's not a rational thought in God's mind? Well, no, they don't. But the way we're going to understand this is by exactly what John says. And so we're going to look at the Greek a little bit, and I'm going to try to be real careful of explaining this in great detail, and hopefully it won't be overhead, it won't be overwhelming. And so you need no knowledge of the Greek language whatsoever. I'm going to try to explain it in baby steps as we go, okay? So don't tune out because of that. I'm going to share this, stop sharing and go back to share, because I wonder if I switch tabs, do you still see this or not? So here we have this interlinear. I'm just going to switch it back to the original language for sake of clarity here. Here's our John 1:1. It says, in the beginning, arche is the term for beginning or ruler. In the beginning was, this is the imperfect form of the verb eimi. We can see here there's parsing intrinsic in this website. This is the third person verb to be in the imperfect sense, which means in English, we would translate that was. And we could translate it, in the beginning, he was the Word, or the Word was. What this implies are two things, mainly. Number one, we see this very same language utilized here in the beginning of John's Gospel, in the beginning, that we do in the beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The only thing is here, where we might expect John to write, in the beginning God, or in the beginning was God, he puts, in the beginning was the Word. Putting the Word in the place of God, implying his deity and implying his preexistence before the creation. Not only that, but this verb, the imperfect form was, what it demands is that the Word was already in this beginning. He was already before it. No matter when this beginning was, I tend to think it was the beginning of creation, just like Genesis. No matter when this beginning was, the Word was already in existence. And so what this tells us, by implication, is that the Word is eternal. And in putting the Word in the place of God, we're receiving a hint here that the Word is personal and not impersonal, which Oneness Pentecostals, again, they would say that the Word is not a person, but in fact is a thing. And so let me quote a couple of Oneness sources for you. Let's see what I can find. Just give me 1 second here. All right. So this is what David K. Bernard has said. Bernard I've mentioned in past editions of this series. Bernard is the preeminent oneness apologist. He is I still believe he's the Superintendent General of the United Pentecostal Church International. Maybe he's not still, but he was. I haven't kept up. He's also in charge of Urshan Graduate School. And this is what he says about the term logos, or word. He writes, the Word was not a separate person or a separate God any more than a man's word is a separate person from him. Rather, the Word was the thought, plan, or mind of God. The Word was with God in the beginning and actually was God himself. What he means there is the Word was the Father himself. So you notice that Bernard is understanding the Word as really two things. An impersonal entity, namely the thought, plan of Jesus, I would imagine. I think that's his idea. So the Word is a thought or plan, and then he says, or the Word is God's mind. In other words, he doesn't know which. Maybe it's all three, but that would be contradictory. And then he says, no, the Word is God himself. Well, hold on a second. If you say the Word is a thought or a plan, that's impersonal. That's not a person. That's an impersonal object, a thing. And then if you say the Word is God, well, that's different than saying the Word is a thought or plan. These are contradictions, which is why when I talk to Oneness Pentecostals, I will often ask them, is the Word personal or impersonal? And they will often say, well, the Word is impersonal. And then I'll say, well, it says the Word was God. So does that mean that God is impersonal? And so you get the drift. So going back here, recognizing that Oneness Pentecostals take a very pagan Greek view of the Logos, namely that he is an impersonal entity, the thought, reason, rationale of God, or contradictorily God himself. Let's take a look at this second clause. Kai halagos ein prostantheon, and the Word was with God. Here again, we have that imperfect verb indicating that this has always been the case, even before the beginning, meaning the beginning of the creation of time itself. The Word was with God. Now, this word pros, it's a preposition. It typically means to or toward. In some cases, it can mean with. In this kind of construction, it bears the force of with, which is why it's translated. And one thing to note, that when the term pros is used in the manner such as this, it always indicates two persons who are under consideration. So I'm quoting here from a very renowned New Testament scholar, D.A. Carson, who I believe, if my memory serves me, has memorized the Greek New Testament. It's impressive. This is what he says about this preposition as it is used here, and this is from his pillar commentary on the Gospel of John, which I highly recommend. He says, in all but one or two peculiar constructions, pros, this preposition, may mean with only when a person is with a person, usually in some fairly intimate relationship. And that suggests that John may be pointing out rather subtly that the Word he is talking about is a person with God and is therefore distinguished from God and enjoying a special relationship with him. Now, he mentions one of the exceptions, 1 Peter 3:15. It's difficult construction there. So that's one exception. The other exception, I believe, is Galatians 2:9. I don't think that's an exception because there's a better way of rendering that, but I digress. The point is that Carson says that when the term is used in this way, it almost always, virtually always, except this one verse, indicates a person with a person in this kind of construction. And so we get a little bit of a hint at the personhood of Christ. The great A.T. Robertson noted that pros, being the root word of face, implies that the Word was toward or face to face with God. I think the imagery is legit, although it might be slightly overstated. And so here again, we see the personhood of the Word. This is not an impersonal entity. Again, I'm arguing that the term Word is being used as a metaphor to describe the Son of God. The third clause, kai theos ein halagos. So, and it says God was the Word. Now, you might be wondering, well, wait a second. I thought it was, and the Word was God. And you'd be right. That's how English translations translate it, and that is how it is to be translated. However, in the Greek of this clause, we have a what is called a predicate nominative construction. Now, if you look at this closely, this little word right here is called the definite article. This is the masculine nominative definite article, this word right here. And we see that throughout this verse. Because the Word has that definite article associated with it, that means necessarily that John is telling us about the Word. He's not so much telling us about God, he is by implication, but his subject is the Word. He's telling us who this Word is, which necessitates the translation, and the Word was God. Now, why does John put God way out front over here in the beginning of this clause? Good question. The reason why he does that is for emphasis. You might be surprised to know that whereas in English, word order is king. You know, if I say, Noah threw the ball, Mike threw the ball, that tells you who's doing the action of the verb. It tells you who the direct object is, the ball. But in the Greek language, you could say the same thing several different ways, mixing up the words, and it would basically still mean the same thing. Now, that doesn't mean that word order is inconsequential. It is of consequence. And here, John places theos, God, up in front, emphasizing the nature of the word, the quality of the word. This is what is called a qualitative construction. And so what John is telling us then is not that the Word is the God that he was with, but rather he's telling us that the Word is as to his nature God, that he is exactly like the God of the second clause, but that he is not the God of the second clause, meaning he's not the Father, he's the Son. Now, moving on to this next verse, we have autos, ein, en, arche, proston, theon. Autos is your demonstrative pronoun. He was in the beginning with God. Now, why does John say that again? Because basically, he's taking the first clause and the second clause, putting them together and repeating them. Well, ask yourself why. Why is John emphasizing that the Word was with God? Could it be that he's trying to make sure that we understand that the Word is not the God that he was with? Obviously. Oneness Pentecostals miss the emphasis here. They don't see it. And you can point it out to them. Say clearly, the Word was with God. Now, one bit of argumentation that you will hear consistently with Oneness Pentecostals, they'll say, okay, so you believe the Word is the Son. And you say, yeah, I do. And then they'll say, okay, you believe the God mentioned here is the Father in John 1:1. And you say, yeah, sure. And they'll say, okay, let's translate it that way. In the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with the Father. Sounds good. And then they'll say the Son was the Father, meaning the Word was God. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that qualitative construction. There's not an identification being made in this third clause. Rather, there's a characterization of what the Word is, of what kind of being he is, of what quality he is. It's a characterization, not an identification. That's important. We're being told that the Word is as to his nature deity. We're not being told that the Word is the God that he was with, as if that would even make any sense. Meaning that he's not the Father, he's the Son. And the Son is as to his nature deity. And this is certainly not the only place where we're told this. Hebrews chapter 1, the Son of God he's the exact expression of the Father's nature. Same exact sentiment. It's interesting. Hebrews chapter 1, John chapter 1, very, very similar in many ways. It's helpful to use John chapter 1 and Hebrews chapter 1 as an intertextual commentary so that we can better understand them both. So we have this emphasis right here. Look at verse 3. Panta di autu, agenata, kai choris autu, agenata ude, hen ha gegonen. So this is the neuter, all things, panta, meaning everything, all things. It's all through him was made, meaning all things were made through him, and apart from him was made not one thing that was made. Now, this is fascinating language and really emphatic, and you could probably sense that. Let's look at how the gospel is translated in the ESV. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that has been made. Yeah, it's a good translation. It misses on one little interesting aspect. You'll notice here that it says ude, which means nothing or none, or not one, right? Hen, this is the term meaning one. Heis mia hen, all mean one. Hen ha gegonen, not even one thing was made apart from him. So what is John saying? He's saying that the Word created it all. He made it all. And notice the pronoun that is being used here. All things through him were made. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't go around talking about impersonal entities using terms like him. Oneness Pentecostals, however, if they think that the Word is merely a thought in the mind of God, a plan, they might be inclined to use that kind of language. But that isn't the language that they might be inclined to use the language of it, because it's an impersonal entity. Unitarians, so-called biblical Unitarians, tend to argue for this rendering. It made all things. No. He was the one through whom all things were made. Now, notice this right here, this little construction here. Here's your verb, Egenata is the aorist form, roughly in English, the past tense form of the verb to become, meaning he made it, right? That's literally what the word means. He made it. The pronoun, autuo, right? He made all things through. This is the preposition dia. It is joined with the genitive, the possessive pronoun. Now, in the Greek and the New Testament, when you have a construction like this, what this means is that the Son of God was the agent through whom the Father created all things. Through him, all things were made. And apart from him was not one thing that was made that has been made. Okay? In other words, the Word is not a creature. The Word is the creator, and he is the one through whom the Father created it all. And this is the consistent testimony of the New Testament. It's consistent. 1 Corinthians 8:6. All things are from the Father and through the Son. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. All things came through him. They're made by him and for him, right? Hebrews 1, all things were made through him, meaning the universe was made through him. Consistently, the New Testament teaches us that. So that's important to note, really important. So we've learned a few things here. John puts the Word, the Son of God, metaphorically, using him, identifying him as the Word, in the place where we might expect God. In the beginning was the Word. The Word is eternal. 3 times we're told that by means of the imperfect verb. The Word was with God, meaning with the Father, and the Word was as to his nature deity. And the Word, again, is emphasized to be distinct from the Father. He was in the beginning with God. And then verse 3, we're told all things through the Word were made, that came into being. It's the preposition in the construction there indicates personal agency, not impersonal, meaning that the person of the Word was the one through whom all things were created. Now, you might ask me, well, how do I know the Word is the Son of God? How do I know the God being spoken of as the Father? Well, I guess we can go back to the English here. Verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Now, Oneness Pentecostals say that Jesus is the Father incarnate. They say the Son is the Father incarnate. But look at what this says. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Father? No. Glory as of the only Son, full of grace and truth, from the Father. What this tells us is that the Word is the Son of God, always has been the Son of God. We demonstrate that, Hebrews chapter 1 especially, and that the Word is from the Father. This is the consistent testimony of Jesus, that the Father sent the Son. And so the God of the second clause of John 1:1, the Word was with God. That's the Father. The Word is the Son of God. Now, let's go one step further and ask, well, why does John use this metaphorical language to describe the Son of God in the first place? Why does he call him the Word? Well, it's a good question. Why does he? What does Jesus do when he arrives? He testifies of the one who sent him consistently. He says, my food is to do the will of my Father. If you believe in me and the one who sent me, you have eternal life. John 5:24. Over and over and over again, Jesus says, I've come to testify of my Father. Not explicitly, but not so many words. Jesus' role in redemption, and this is certainly not his only role, is to express God to man. That is why he's called the Word, because he is the image of the invisible God. Jesus' role, the Son of God's responsibility, was to reveal God to man. This is why he's called the Word. And this point is emphasized in the prologue of John, not only in John 1:1, but in John 1:18, the very end of the prologue. And so if we look down here, John 1:18, no one has ever seen God. Remember, we noted that a few videos ago. We said, yeah, that's the consistent teaching of the Old Testament. No one has seen God. The only God, the monogenes theos, the one and only God, who is at the Father's side or close to the Father's heart, he has made him known. Notice that. The Word has made the Father known. How so? Because the Word is the Son of God, and it is through the ministry of the Son of God that we come to know who God truly is. Jesus says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, speaking of the Father, as the only true God and the one whom you sent. That's how you have eternal life. And so Jesus' mission was to reveal God to man, one of his many responsibilities during his incarnate ministry. This is why Jesus is metaphorically identified as the Word. Now, he's not a spoken word, as Oneness Pentecostals tend to say. Well, they say, look, by the word of the heavens, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. That means a spoken word. No. You got to pay attention to how John is using that language. If we were to take Oneness Pentecostal hermeneutics, their interpretive ways, consistently, we'd have to say that Jesus is a literal piece of bread, that he really is a shepherd. He's out there with the sheep right now. Come on. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have to be able to recognize metaphorical language when we see it, and we see it here. And it is obvious. There's metaphor running throughout the prologue of John. As I mentioned, life, light, this sort of thing. It's quite clear. Okay, so that's the prologue of John. And by the way, you develop questions. What I'd like to do in the coming episodes is collate all the questions I've been asked in the comments of these videos and questions I've been receiving by email from some of you who have been contacting me about these videos. Some of you are Oneness Pentecostals. Some of you are Christians just trying to learn a little bit. I want to answer all of your questions. So if you would, comment your questions below, and we will come up with an episode later on where we will answer some of those questions or explain some things. And so if you got 50 questions, comment 50 times and write a few answers down, a few questions that is, and we'll see what we can do. Okay, so let's move to another passage. We'll see how many of these we can get through. I'm going to share my screen now with you, and what we're going to be looking at is 1 Peter chapter 3. Now, apart from Isaiah 9:6, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 16 is perhaps the most widely used Oneness Pentecostal proof text. And I have here, as I mentioned, the English Standard Version. Let's take a look at what it says. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up into glory. Now, if we were reading, say, the King James Version, it would say something different here. Instead of he was manifest in the flesh, what we would find is God was manifest in the flesh. And within primitive Oneness Pentecostalism, this was a key component of their theology. They began with the belief that God was one person, and in order to say that the Son of God is the Father incarnate, they understood God was manifested in the flesh to mean the Father was manifested in the flesh. This is still very much a popular understanding of Oneness Pentecostals. So often Oneness Pentecostals quote 1 Peter 3:16, and they believe that they've refuted Trinitarianism. So a couple of things here. First, why does the English Standard Version say he was manifested in the flesh instead of what the King James has, God was manifested in the flesh? Well, what we have here is a textual variant. Now, before your eyes glaze over, let me pull up the Greek here. All right. So here we have verse 16 down here. Now, this is our phrase in question. All right. This is a relative pronoun. It's pronounced hos or hos. My eyes, let me get my glasses here. It's pretty small on my screen. Hos, ephanerethon, or phanerethe, and sarki. Okay? He was manifest in flesh. Okay. The reason why you have God was manifest in the flesh in the King James Version, and the reason why you have this in the English Standard Version, is because there are differences among the manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, of which there are many. Last time I checked, there are about 5,824. There are probably more at this point. That was probably a year ago that I checked up on that. And among the Greek manuscripts that represent 1 Timothy 3, there are a number of different readings, meaning a number of different variations on this one verse. Let me just pull up my list here of what are called the textual variants. Let's see here. Okay. So among the manuscripts of the New Testament, we have represented this reading, has ephanerothe. Then we also have ha ephanerothe, which is which was manifested instead of he or who was manifested. And then we also have theos ephanerothe, which means God was manifested. Okay? Oneness Pentecostals almost universally quote the King James, God was manifested. Now, the earliest and best manuscripts that we have of 1 Timothy 3 say he or who was manifested, has ephanerothe. We don't have the very best manuscripts don't have God. Now, in the original language of the New Testament manuscripts, the way that God would have been written would not be hatheos, the noun for God. Let me see if I can find a place in this chapter where it uses the term theos, so that I'll just go back here to John 1:1. Here. This is the term theos. This is the accusative form of it. You can see the lexical form over here, theos, okay? When that term, God, and indeed a number of other terms were written in the original manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, what you had was not so much the full term theos. What you had was an abbreviated form. And these abbreviated forms are called nomina sacra, or from the Latin, sacred names, or in the singular nomen sacrum, sacred name. And this was the scribe's way of giving an honorific identification to that term. And so right from the get-go, all of the manuscripts, the very earliest manuscripts we have of the New Testament, all use this device, the nomina sacra. The terms Son, Jesus, Holy Spirit, God are all abbreviated. And the way that they abbreviated them was they took the first and last letters, put them together. So in theos, it's theta and sigma, put them together, and they put a bar over the top, signifying a nomina sacra. Now, additionally, in those earliest manuscripts, you have what is called majuscule text or unsealed text, which means that all of the terms and letters were written in majuscule or capital form. And they were also run together. Once in a while, you'll find a manuscript that has some spaces, but you would have those terms running together. Now, if you were to look at this, what we have in the ESV, where it says has, this is it right here. If you were to look at that in its majuscule form, you would have something that looks like a capital O, a capital omicron. And then you would have a capital sigma, right? Which kind of looks like that. That looks very, very similar to a nomen sacrum for theos. And so what likely happened, and I lay this out in my book if you want to check that out in detail, what likely happened was either a scribe mistook has for a nomina sacra, or a scribe clarified, as was the tendency among scribes, who this was talking about and wrote God. Now, with regard to Oneness Pentecostalism, is that really that big of a deal? Well, not really, because whether it says God or he who is sort of inconsequential when it comes to theology, even though Oneness Pentecostals believe it's very important. Because again, Oneness Pentecostals understand God to be Unitarian and the Father becoming the Son in human flesh. So that's one point of clarification. A little bit complex. Hope I didn't lose you there. And again, I say much about this in the book, and hopefully could provide you a better understanding. So as I mentioned, the best manuscripts, the earliest that we have of 1 Timothy 3, using the science of textual criticism, we can determine that the original reading was, as the ESV has it, he was manifest in the flesh, or who was manifest in the flesh. It's the same word, has. And so not so much God. The first time the rendering or the reading God shows up is in the 6th century. That's hundreds of years after we have has. And there are other good reasons why has is to be preferred, but again, I don't want to go into too much detail. The point is there's a textual variant here. The best reading is he or who, and it doesn't say God was manifest in the flesh, but then again, that's not a hill to die on, except with King James onlys, but that's an aside. Now, when it says he was manifest in the flesh, you need to understand that Oneness Pentecostals interpret that to mean that the Father was manifested in the flesh, meaning the Father became the Son incarnate, that the Son incarnate is the Father incarnate, right? There is no Son incarnate in Oneness theology. It's the Father incarnate. That's the Son. Well, since they understand that way, does this text teach that? Well, let's go back to the English, and hopefully you can see this. I must go back and share it with you. He was manifest in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up to glory. This is obviously talking about the Son of God. Does this phrase, he was manifested in the flesh, or God was manifest in the flesh, mean that Jesus is the Father in human flesh? It doesn't say that. It doesn't even come close to saying that. That is merely an assumption by Oneness Pentecostals. This became a very important verse early on in primitive Oneness Pentecostalism. It still is, and it's a very common misconception, and there is absolutely no ground to it. Now, one other thing before we move on. Going back to the Greek here, see if I can get it to you. Now, this verb, it is the lexical form is phanerao. It means to be made manifest or to be revealed. We get the English cognate phantom from it. In the Greek of the New Testament, verbs have voice, meaning, and we get this a little bit in English, but verbs have active voice, passive voice, so forth. Well, here, this is a passive verb, which is why when we look at the translation, it says, he was manifested in the flesh. Now, what that passive verb indicates is that the one who was manifested in the flesh was the recipient of the action of the verb, meaning that Jesus, the Son of God, didn't manifest himself in the flesh, but rather somebody did the action of the verb. Now, who sent the Son in human flesh? It was the Father. Let's look at another passage which says that. Leading on to our next passage for our consideration, verse 3 of Romans chapter 8, for God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. The point is, 1 Timothy 3:16 implies the preexistence of the Son and an eternal distinction between the Father and Son because of that passive verb. The Father made the Son manifest in the flesh. That doesn't teach the Father. I mean, if you want to say he or God, that's the Father, then who was it making the Father manifest in the flesh? Because you got somebody else up in the heavenlies doing that, right? So the point is, on closer examination, as we think about these things, what we see is teaching that is by the Apostle Paul that is totally incompatible with oneness theology. Let's take a close look at Romans chapter 8. For God has sent his Son, or God has done what the law weakened by the flesh could not do, by sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. All right, this is important. God the Father sent his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. Now, what this implies is that the Son wasn't always in the likeness of sinful flesh, but rather the Son was sent by the Father in the likeness of sinful flesh. Now, you wouldn't need to say that if the Son's existence is limited to human existence, like Oneness Pentecostals teach. Again, Oneness Pentecostals teach that the Son is the Father incarnate. You can't distinguish the Son apart from his humanity, right? If that's true, if the Son only has a human existence, that's the only existence he's ever known, that he's both God and man, according to Oneness Pentecostals, problems there, but that's another subject. If that's the case, and the Son has always been a human being, albeit a human being with a divine nature, what sense does it make to say that he was sent in the likeness of sinful flesh? It makes no sense. It becomes redundant. What Paul is saying here implies that the Son pre-existed his human flesh, pre-existed his birth. If I, in fact, let me just pull up my book here. I sort of argue this in a much more concise way than I can articulate it. Now, I'm getting hungry and tired of it, so so the notion of being sent in the likeness of something presupposes that the one being sent exists apart from that likeness prior to the act of sending. A little bit convoluted, but maybe you get it. For example, if one is sent in the likeness of Omega, then it logically follows that they existed in a state other than Omega prior to the sending. In other words, when Paul says that the Son was sent in the likeness of sinful flesh, that implies that he existed apart from the flesh to begin with. It's kind of an obvious implication. It's so obvious that sometimes we miss it. A similar sentiment is given in Romans chapter 9, which I can assure you is a passage Oneness Pentecostals are not familiar with. Or if they're familiar with, it's probably not a text they like very much. Romans chapter 9, verse 5, to them, meaning to Israel, to the Jews, belong the patriarchs, and from their race, according to the flesh, is Christ, who is God over all. Christ is, according to the flesh, from their race. He's a Jew. Now, if the Son of God, was only human, what sense would that make? Would make no sense. Another example from the Pauline corpus in Galatians chapter 1. Let me go back and share this again with you to make sure that you can see it. In Galatians, you have a situation where Paul is defending the gospel, of course. He also spends quite a bit of time defending his apostleship because there were people in Galatia teaching that he was not a true apostle. They were calling themselves super apostles, just as in 2 Corinthians. And so Paul's going to defend his apostleship, and the reason why he does that is because if his apostleship is true and genuine, then so is his gospel necessarily, and vice versa. So take a look here. This is verse 11. For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. Okay. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. So what is Paul saying here? Is he saying that Jesus Christ is not a man? Well, what he's saying here is that Jesus Christ is not merely a man, but the Son of God, in Oneness theology, is a human being. We can go further and look at what Paul says about his apostleship. He says something very similar, that he was made an apostle not by a mere man, but by the Son of God, by Jesus Christ, indicating that the Son of God pre-existed prior to his birth apart from human flesh. And there's simply a variety of passages that we can look at that say this, that teach this sort of thing. So what we'll do in our next episode, our next part 6 of this series, we're going to look at maybe 3 major passages. We'll look at Philippians chapter 2. We'll look at John chapter 17, and we'll take a look at Hebrews chapter 1. And these three, I think, give us some of the most effective ways of refuting the teaching of Oneness Pentecostals. I think then after that, hopefully I'll have some questions that I can answer for you. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about Oneness Pentecostal soteriology, that is, what they teach about salvation. Now, that's important. Salvation is extraordinarily important. So in closing, before we move on here, let's think about one more passage that Oneness Pentecostals use to say that the Son of God is the Father. We looked at 1 Timothy 3:16. We looked at Isaiah 9:6. Let's think about one more. Let's look at John chapter 14. All right. So let me pull it up here for you and share my screen. There we are. So this is John 14. Let's read it together. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again. I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. And you know the way, and you know the way to where I'm going. Thomas said, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can you say we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, is there any ambiguity about that? The only way man can get to the Father is through Jesus Christ. Right? You have to go through Jesus Christ. And indeed, as we take a look at the Greek of John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, you remember early in the video, I said that preposition in John 1:3, all things were made through him, right? Without him was not anything that was made. I noted that preposition indicates personal agency, that the Son of God, the Word, was the one through whom God, the Father, brought all things into creation. Here we see a similar construction. Look at what it says in John 14:6. Where is it now? No one, oudes means no one, erkatai, from erkabai, meaning to come. No one comes to the Father, tan patera, from which you get patriarch, right? Except, means except, through dia, with the genitive pronoun me. Now, Oneness Pentecostals often say through doesn't mean through. It doesn't mean by means of. You Christians are wrong despite your years of parsing through the Greek New Testament. Look at John 14:6. In the same way that no one can come through the Father except through Jesus Christ, no one, all things were created by the Father through Jesus Christ. You see the parallelism here? This is a good passage to bring up in, contrasting John 1:3 and similar passages. So going back here to, where is it now? Well, let's go to John 14 if we can. We'll take a look at the English. Let me make sure that you can see this. So here's verse 6. Verse 7, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Now, Oneness Pentecostals will say, well, see, there you go. Jesus is saying that he is the Father. Really? Is that what he's saying? No. What he's saying is, I'm the image of the Father. I'm exactly like the Father. How do we know that? Well, we know it by way of the context. There's a tacit distinction between himself and the Father. In my Father's house are many rooms. He didn't say, in my house are many rooms. We're going to see that further in this passage as well. John 14:6, no one can come to the Father but by me. If Jesus is the Father, that makes absolutely no sense. Verse 8, Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Oneness Pentecostals will go to this passage time and time again. Verse 9, Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long that you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Oneness Pentecostals say, case closed. There it is. Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That must mean that the Son of God is the Father incarnate. Despite the fact that Christians haven't believed that for 2,000 years. Is that what this text is saying? Absolutely not. What Jesus is saying here is exactly what John says in the beginning of his gospel, that Jesus is the revealer of the Father to mankind. If you want to know what God is like, you need to look no further than the Lord Jesus Christ, because he is the image of the invisible God. And so Jesus continues, do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? Is Jesus saying that I'm the Father? Or is he saying that I indwell the Father and the Father indwells me? Meaning you can't separate out the two. They're not radically distinct in the sense that there are two gods, the Son and the Father. Rather, the Father is indwelt by the Son and the Son is indwelt by the Father. Now, if you say that the Son is merely the Father incarnate, in what sense does the Son indwell the Father? That's weird, man. You got a human being indwelling the Father? I don't know. I wonder if Oneness Pentecostals think about that. But if this is talking about the eternal Son of God, which it is, of course, then this makes perfect sense. It's perfectly consistent. The words that I say to you, I do not speak of my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does the works. Meaning that the Son is indwelt by the Father just in the same way as the Father is indwelt by the Son. Do you not believe? Truly, truly, I say to you, this is verse 12. Whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these he will do, because I'm going to the Father. Now, the only way that you can get that to the point where you say, Jesus is identifying himself as the Father in this passage, is by ignoring the context and isolating the passage and saying, look, it says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. But he says clearly here, I'm going to the Father. If he is the Father in human flesh, what sense would that make? We must ask. Explain this to us, because what you're saying seems foreign to the Christian. That's what foreign to the Bible. We need to say that to our Oneness Pentecostal friends, because the great enemy of Oneness Pentecostalism is a Christian who knows how to read the Bible in context. It's a Christian who doesn't merely go from one proof text to another like Tarzan leaping through the woods on vines. It's the Christian who looks at a passage in its context. And that's important, and that's key. In the vast majority of cults and false teachings out there can be easily dismantled if only we would look at the context of passages when people make claims. So that being said, I hope this was helpful for you. Wish I had a beverage by here. Sorry about all the throat clearing. Again, leave a comment, like the video, share it. That would be very helpful. And leave your questions below, and we can answer them in order. And so be the first one to write a question, and we can answer that in the coming videos. And again, as I mentioned, next time we will be taking a look at some of those other important Christological passages. I very much appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and I pray to our Lord that this is helpful to you, edifying to you, and helpful as you witness the gospel to those who desperately need it. So thank you very much for watching.